To this special edition of Forever Blue Shirts, the show. I'm Jim Cerny. He is Anthony Scultore. And we've got a deal by the New York Rangers ahead of the trade deadline here, as the Rangers have acquired their third line center, Alex Wennberg, coming over from Seattle. Not a shocker, not in the Casey Middlestat, Bowen Byram shocker of the day category. But whether we expected it or not, the Rangers do get their third line center, Anthony. And even though it's not something you get super excited about, it fills a hole in the lineup and it slots people into the right spots. Like to me, on a championship contender, Alex Wennberg, a good veteran two-way center, is a third line center. He's not a top six guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he's in the right fit here with the New York Rangers. And I think you take Johnny Brodzinski, who on a championship level team is probably better suited to be a fourth line player. It probably puts him now on the fourth line as well. So, we'll get into more of this here, but that's my immediate takeaway. Your thoughts once the trade went down today?
I mean, when his name came up, I mean, he wasn't going to thrill me, but at the same time, he's not being used as a top six forward. He's on the third line. He's an upgrade over Brodzinski, solid two-way player. He's grown from being an offensive guy primarily when he first came into the league. And he did play with Panarin too. I think everyone should kind of know that. And he's got familiarity with Mika Zibanejad from Sweden. So I think he's going to fit quite nicely in the locker room to start there. I think he's great 5-on-5, which is a problem area for the Rangers. I think he's got a little bit more versatility and maybe could bring out a little bit more out of Will Cooley and Cabo Caco, right? So that now you have a nice looking third line, and you can use Brodzinski now as the 13th forward if you feel like you want to have a bigger presence on the fourth line with a guy like Adam Enstrom. Rempe, I do believe one of those guys is about to be sent down, right? Because
not both.
Yeah, right. I think we're heading where the Rangers are going to make another move. They have to address the top six right wing position on that line with Zibanejad and Kreider. I'm sure we're going to talk about Frank Vetrano for sure. I think that's coming up in this conversation. But just based on the deal, a second round pick, a fourth round pick. It remains conditional, could become a third, depending on what Nils Lundkvist does. We're not getting too into it. The real key for me here is that they retain 50%, right? So that's why you paid those two picks. That's 2.25 for Wennberg. I would have liked to have seen a third party involved to drive that down even further. But just looking at cap friendly, the cap space is 2.9, right? And they haven't sent anybody down. Once they send down Edstrom, you're going to get another 800,000 plus, or Rempe, another 800,000. That gives you the 3.65 million you need to bring in Vetrano, right?
So, absolutely.
I mean, there's room there. There's definitely play there. So I do like this deal. I like this deal a lot because I still think they have the flexibility to get that top six player.
That was the key, because this might be the first trade, but this was not the most important trade that they need to make. The bigger hole to fill is that right wing, Mika Zibanejad's line, somebody who's going to help drive things 5-on-5 and hopefully get Zibanejad more on track in the 5-on-5 game. So that's the more important pressing need. But this one was important too. And, I mentioned how, it slots him into his right spot. Listen, he's been playing a top six role with the Seattle Kraken, and that's not quite his fit. And you talked about him being more of an offensive player earlier in his career. He had a couple good seasons, around 40 points, and he had the 59-point season. But since then, and we're talking now, 6-7 years ago that was, he hasn't topped 38 points since. So he is what he is now, which is, and this is fine for what the Rangers need, a good, solid veteran two-way guy. I'd like to see him better on faceoffs. He's actually going to be a downgrade in the faceoff circle. So that's a little bit of an issue. But he's a solid defensive guy, smart, and again, plays a solid 5-on-5 game. Now, here's the other thing that factors in. Because he does have that experience in the top six. I'm not saying you want to play him there regularly, but let's say you're in the playoffs. Let's say somebody goes down. he's the type guy that can handle those extra minutes and that responsibility. And he's certainly not going to hurt you defensively if he's playing up in the top six. He may not be a big point driver, but he's not going to hurt you either. And that's an important factor here because you just don't know. This is a depth thing, right? Your bottom six sometimes has to feed into your top six during a long playoff run. And Wennberg's been there, done that in that role. And you talk about, and you're rightfully so, a relationship with Panarin on ice and a relationship with Zibanejad as well. Hopefully all things go for the Rangers' sake, go as planned, and he's in that third line role, and I think he's just a solid fit, and the price is good as you talked about, and it sets them up for the next thing, and the next thing is getting that right wing. And you and I don't agree on everything, and it's fun because it would be no fun if we did agree on everything. And yeah, it'd be so boring.
Everyone's tuning in for us to argue.
Yeah, but you and I have been on Frank Vetrano. We both have been since, before the All-Star break, certainly at the All-Star break where it really started to build up momentum. And it appears the Rangers are right in line with us that this is the guy. So let's talk about the pros and cons if they go and make a Frank Vetrano trade. So why don't you lead off with what you think the pros and cons are? Because I got a couple of my own.
I think he's a gamer. I loved him on the Rangers. I don't care who he was playing with. The reason why is because he's pretty much a straight line player. He's got excellent speed. I'm not saying he's a speedster with great wheels, but he can certainly skate. And he's a shoot first kind of guy, which the Rangers really need shoot first attitude. I'm sorry. Mika and Chris Kreider, even Chris Kreider, 50 goals, still sometimes looks to defer to Mika if he can. And then Mika looks to defer back. It's like, okay, guys, what are you doing? So I love Vetrano for that reason alone. Here's another reason why I like Vetrano. It was a mistake letting him go. The Rangers have been trying to fill the right wing slot since they traded Buchnevich. And they haven't had the answer. Now, when they traded Buchnevich, I got it. I understood it. Cap reasons. You wanted to give Kakko an opportunity. You wanted to give maybe Loff an opportunity on the right side. There were so many reasons why I understood the move, right? It was tight. I get it. When they got Vetrano, I really, really wanted them to keep him. Find a way, whatever it was. But if you kept Vetrano, you certainly were sending a signal that you were going to block one of those two youngsters. Unfortunately, Kakko really has not done much. I mean, fans are all in an uproar. We should never trade Kakko. We should not trade Kakko. I was like, I get it. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at his numbers and you forget where you drafted him, you really have to start going, do you really think somebody's really clawing down your door for Kakko at this point? And you know what? If there wasn't so much emphasis on Lafreniere being the first overall pick and everyone looking at him as a bust, could you imagine if it was just Kakko, how they would be looking at him as a second overall pick with what Jack Hughes is doing in New Jersey? So, I mean, looking at that, to me, that's the pro. There's just so much there. And plus you get him for one more year. It's not just one playoff. So if you can,
good salary too. We should talk about.
Yeah, 3.65 million is pretty decent, and the cap's going up.
For a guy that's going to be a 30-goal scorer this year.
Yeah, so right. I mean, to me, that's the pros. I mean, I think cons probably a little harder. So I'm going to segue and give that one to you.
So I don't see a lot of cons in it, especially because of what the salary is. I think it's looking like a first rounder and a prospect probably going to Anaheim there. Pat Verbeek certainly held firm in trading Adam Henrique earlier in the day. So, if he's pulling back a first rounder there, and granted, they also included Sam Carrick in that trade to Edmonton. But, he's holding out here. It's going to be the first round pick from the Rangers, which I would not get hung up on. That I am not hung up on the Rangers trading their first round pick. It's going to be lower 20s, could even be in the 30s. So it's okay. Like, you don't want to do that every year. And I know that, there have been other first round picks that have been traded. You're at the point now in a wide open season, I think, there is no one clear cut Stanley Cup favorite this year. The Rangers are near the top of that list of teams that have a good shot this season. It's time. You go for it. And if it costs you a first round pick in Brett Berard, That's the price of doing business. So I don't know if that's pro or con. To some people, that's going to be a con.
Uh-huh,
To other
uh-huh.
people, there's going to be cons about, oh, Capo Caco, you gave him a few games on the top line. Now you're knocking him back down to the third line. Listen, I don't worry about that either. I think he slots in nicely on the third line. Certainly had a good rhythm there with Brodzinski and Cooley. Sure, I know he drives play 5-on-5 and he can be physical. He just doesn't score enough to be on that top line. I, if you ask me right here, do you win a Stanley Cup right now, today, with Capo Caco being your top line right wing? I say, no, you do not. Okay. Now, I know that angers a lot of Ranger fans. The other part that they're not going to be thrilled with, some of the fans, is that when you bring in Wennberg, so there's one roster spot. And then if you bring in Vetrano or whomever it's going to be, because they're going to get a top line right wing to play with Mika,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to knock a couple of your favorites either out of the lineup or completely all the way back down to the minor leagues, as we touched on. And I love Matt Rempe. And I think what he's done and for that room and on the ice and the fan base, his teammates, it's an awesome story. And you know what? I think the kid can play a little bit.
I do.
But look at the numbers. Peter Laviolette doesn't trust them with more than 5 or 6 minutes a night. That is not going to work in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So you need to lengthen out your roster. And I like the fact that you have an option to put a Rempe in or an Edstrom in, assuming that they get knocked out of the lineup
Right.
with VC coming back down and Brodzinski coming back down. By the way, that's a pretty good fourth line if you go Barkley, Goudreau, Jimmy VC, and Johnny Brodzinski, right?
100%.
That's a line that you put out there as a checking line. It's a line that could, put up a couple points here and there as well, as we've seen from VZ all year long in that role. So it just makes them better and deeper, and you're going to need that depth for a long playoff run. So obviously, I didn't really come up with any of my own cons here, but I guess I'm reading into things that people are sending me on social media and all that. Oh, what about Rempe? How can you bring somebody in and knock him out of the lineup? 21-year-old kid that plays 5-6 minutes a night, spark plug,
Mm-hmm.
love him, love his physical play. But again, think about the end goal. It's trying to win a Stanley Cup championship.
You're not going to have rookies probably on that fourth line. You know, Edstrom. By the way, Edstrom could be one of the players traded for Vetrano. He could be it's another piece that hey, listen, we're going to have to move somebody because it's also salary cap, right? We talk about sending him down, but you could also remove that 800,000 off the salary in order to get a Vetrano, right? So and Brett Berard is the name that has been pointed out to me by a couple of people, possibly being part of the package going to Anaheim. I believe, I'm not 100% sure because I didn't have a chance to look it up, but Brett Berard was part of the U.S. national team, and so was Trevor Zegras. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some connection there as well. I think that's something that needs to be considered. Zegras may know him pretty well from that team. So, like I said, I think that's the move. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Jake Guentzel from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Everywhere, again, let's get it. And I'm like, I get it. And everyone feels like that's the guy. That's the guy that's going to get you over the top. And I spoke with somebody today who, when I asked them, I said, what legitimacy of it? And the first thing they said to me is like, okay, Jake Guentzel's a left wing. Which one are you bumping down?
Which is my
or
point. He's a
Panarin?
left wing.
Right. So yeah, maybe he could play the right side, but then you're trading away first round pick and prospects. And everyone's like, you could trade Brendan Othmann for him. I'm like, no, I actually don't want to see Brendan Othmann on the Pittsburgh Penguins scoring 30 goals for the next 10 years for a guy I'm going to rent. And if I don't win the cup, is gone somewhere else next year anyway. I'm like, yeah. Is everyone putting this one together? Because I can't. So I also think that, maybe even hearing the name Guentzel is either Chris Drury wanting to drive the price down on other players, or somebody, including the Rangers, to drive the price up because, hey, it's the trade deadline. You include the Rangers and the Maple Leafs in every discussion, no matter how much it doesn't make sense, because that's who you have to do.
Here's the other thing too. Let's say the Rangers really, really are talking to Pittsburgh. Let's say Chris Drury picked up the phone and inquired with Kyle Dubas about
Totally
Jake Gensel.
possible.
Not only totally possible, but that's called doing your job.
Doing your job,
Why
right?
wouldn't you do that?
Hey,
He is the biggest name and the best forward out there on the trade market, right? So
agreed.
that's just doing your job. I agree with you. I don't think it's going to happen. But listen, crazier things have happened, but I don't see it happening. And listen, Pittsburgh's not doing the Rangers any favors.
Uh,
So if you're going to get him, yeah, it's going to be a first round pick is going to be nothing in the trade. It's going to be who the prospect is or the prospects are to get him. So, yeah, I
and by
don't
the
see
way,
that.
you have the Vancouver Canucks, and you could talk about this because I know you wrote about it, right? That story came out that the Canucks would look to flip Elias Lindholm to the Bruins in order to get him. All right. You also have the Vegas Golden Knights with cap space from the LTIR that they could possibly put him on their team, and that's a total Vegas Golden Knights move, right? Then you'd have everyone talking about the Carolina Hurricanes, which is a divisional rival, so I think they'd have to pay through the nose getting in on it too, right? So you've got those three teams, and I'm just like, it looks like that's where it's headed, guys. I mean, that it just seems like those are the biggest options for Gensel. Now, if the Rangers are to get him, to me, this is a Friday 2:59, no bites, and now the
Yeah,
Penguins will take whatever they can get. And
yeah.
I don't think Drury wants to play it that close because it is such an important need to get a top line winger that he would play that game, right? I think he wants to get this addressed. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vetrano deal or a deal for a right wing. I don't know who else. Jason Zucker is probably the other one. I did think Duclair, and so did you, but somebody did tell me that the Rangers aren't keen on Duclair. I don't know why. Maybe it's his 5-on-5 play. Maybe they don't feel he
So
could.
wildly inconsistent.
Yeah, he is inconsistent. So I mean, Duclair made more sense to me than Zucker, but hey, if they can figure out how to work that, maybe that's the move. Zucker does have experience too. So that's what I'm thinking. If Jake Gunsel, it's going to be an 11th hour deal, but I just don't see it.
I don't see it either. Listen, real quickly about Zucker, and we'll wrap this up here. As it's just a quick hit again. If fans have not heard yet, I can't believe they haven't. But certainly, if you're going to our site, you know that Alex Wennberg is now officially a New York Ranger. 2 draft picks going to the Seattle Kraken. We're still waiting for the other shoe to drop at right wing, which Anthony and I are chatting about here. Uh, one more note. A quick thought on Zucker. The upside on him is up. When he's good, he is good. And he tends to, when he's on a good team, in a good situation, and on a good line, he produces. Now, that tells you a couple things about the player, right? He's not making the others around him that much better in a not as good situation. But he rises to the occasion with better talent. So just that's a quick thought on Zucker. Let's wrap up with this because you mentioned Othman. One of the things about if you bring in a player, a wing that is not a rental. So in Vetrano's case, it's going to be here next year if you make that trade. So if it's not Eberle, Duclair, Zucker, whatever, if it's not a rental, you know, and Drury can't worry about this right now, but certainly he does think ahead. You got to kind of think ahead a little bit to next year when you got to figure Othman's going to be on this roster.
Yep.
You got to assume Kakko's still going to be here. He'll be a restricted free agent, but you assume that he's going to sign a contract unless they're so sold on Othman that, they do trade him during the summer. But yeah, just a quick 30, 45-second take on how you think that breaks down if
I
it's not a rental at the
I
deadline.
I think if it's Vetrano that's coming to the Rangers, I think Othman is making the team because he makes less money than Kakko's 2.1. So it's a cap consideration.
And it's not just 2.1 because he's a restricted free
Right. He's
agent
gonna
and he's
he's
going
gonna
to get a
want more.
raise.
So I also believe that the Rangers would probably wisely use Kakko to probably pick up draft picks in the next draft, right? So that way they can make sure they restock the shelves a little bit, because it's Othman's definitely, to me, I think he's NHL ready and he needs a spot. So where are you putting him? And if you have Vetrano, and it's great for Othman too because you don't put pressure on him. You're not putting him in a top 6 role right away.
You can do with Will Cooley.
Yeah, third line, perfect. And he's got familiarity with Cooley. I think it works out nicely. If Hedel is healthy, that's a nice line if you look at it, right? If Hedel is healthy, it looks really good. The other thing I would keep it, I mean, if we're kind of jumping ahead, but I think the Rangers have got to come to that realization that they may have to also try and move Barclay Goodrow in the summer in his $3.6 million salary, because you really shouldn't be paying that for a fourth line player. Buyout is not an option at this point. He's got too many years on his contract. It's not a pretty buyout. So maybe he's also moved along with a pick just to dump some salary. I think they'd have to retain anyway. But those are the type of things that we have to deal with in the salary cap world, and it makes it's maybe for a fan it's no good, but it certainly is interesting for us as writers, right? Because it just gives us so many angles to work with.
Absolutely. Well, the latest angle is Alex Wennberg is a New York Ranger, now their third line center. Expecting him, I would assume, to be in the lineup Saturday when the Rangers skate against the Blues. But we're going to be back before then because the trade deadline arrives 3 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. Whether the Rangers do something or not, we're going to be back to wrap everything up and kind of put a little bow around the trade deadline and then take a look ahead at the rest of the regular season and on through the Stanley Cup playoffs and see where the Rangers stand. Anthony, awesome to talk this over with you. We got more coming up, though. This trade deadline is not here just yet.
On the Vetrano train. Take care, guys.